The Pittsburgh Penguins core three, Sidney Crosby, Evgeni Malkin, and Kris Letang. They've done very well this season, but there is one thing that you can hold against this Pittsburgh Penguins core. Hello everybody and welcome to Penguins to Go, your daily dose of Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Inside the Penguins or anywhere you get your podcast from. I'm your host, Nick Brlansky, and yes, that is correct. You did hear me correctly. There is something you can hold against this Pittsburgh Penguins core, and it showed in massive fashion last night as the Penguins fell on the road to the Detroit Red Wings by a score of 6-4. 3 of those goals coming in the first period as the Penguins went down 3-0 after 20 minutes of play. In many instances, this core has been the only reason that this team is still in any contention for a playoff spot, right? Sidney Crosby has 85 points in 74 games. Evgeni Malkin has 77 points in 74 games. And beyond that, beyond the counting stats, if you've watched the season, if you've watched most of the games this season, you can count so many times that both of these men have just taken over, right? They were practically the sole reason, if not together, the only 2 reasons that this team has won several of their games this season. Even Kris Letang has even had a handful of games like that. I think back to the Florida Panthers game where he had 2 goals and 2 assists upon returning. I think back to the other couple of games in which he scored the overtime winner or he was playing at a supremely high level. Not as much and as often as Sidney Crosby and Evgeni Malkin, but Letang is right there too as somebody who has really brought wins to the Pittsburgh Penguins this season. But for every game that they dominate and lead by example for this Penguins team is 1 or sometimes even 2 where nobody on the roster shows up to play the game practically at all. Last night, obviously, the latest example which is sparking this conversation. 2 days that the Pittsburgh Penguins had off coming into this game. They did have practice on Monday, but 2 days without a game coming into this one in Detroit. The Red Wings were on a miserable stretch of losing games. They had lost 12 of 15, including 5 of the previous 6 games going into that matchup last night. And the Pittsburgh Penguins had a serious chance to improve their playoff chances against the Florida Panthers and the New York Islanders. Last night was the game in hand, as it currently stands. The Penguins could have extended their lead on the Panthers to, I believe, 5 points, and they could have pulled within 1 point of overtaking the New York Islanders for the first wild card spot. Instead, they leave Detroit with absolutely nothing. It'd be one thing if they played well and Detroit played well and it was a great, highly contested matchup, but the Penguins didn't even come out to play to begin with. They came out flat. Back-to-back penalties in the first 10 minutes by Mark Friedman. The penalty kill looking absolutely shell-shocked in that 4 minutes. I understand it's not easy to penalty kill for practically 4 minutes straight, especially when your penalty kill is chasing the amount that the Pittsburgh Penguins were early in that game. But from the second that penalty kill first got out on the ice, they looked like they were shell-shocked by the Detroit Red Wings. They weren't moving their feet. When they were, it was practically booting the puck all over the ice at 5-on-4 and at 5-on-5. And all of a sudden, you look up, 20 minutes had expired, and you're down 3-0 to a Detroit Red Wings team that already has tea time set up in 2 weeks from now. That's on everybody, right? These are all professionals. You can cast blame where you want, and I will. But at the end of the day, it is on everybody a little bit. These guys are getting paid to play this game. They show up, and they just flat out stink for the first 20 minutes. And it wasn't on talent. It was on effort. It was on thinking through the game. They weren't there at the beginning of it. So that's on everybody. But especially on Crosby, Malkin, Letang, and Mike Sullivan. The leadership of this team is failing in these games. Because this isn't a first-time issue. If this was a first-time issue, I wouldn't be talking about it. But the continued issues with playing down to their opponent and coming out extremely flat in these games goes directly against those four men above all. Like I said, everybody should be held accountable, but those four should be under the spotlight for a game like that. And when it happens time after time, at least once or twice every other week, that's on these guys. Too often do they get a lackluster effort against a bottom half team. Specifically, you look at the games against the Red Wings, that's 2 now, in which the Pittsburgh Penguins last time, they came out flying against the Red Wings a couple months ago. I think they went up 4-0 in the first period. They lost that game 6-5 or 5-4 in overtime. And Wallman did the gritty at PPG Paints Arena on the Penguins. That was an embarrassing showing at the end of the day by the Penguins. Last night was no different. But they are 0-3-2 against the Red Wings and the Montreal Canadiens. 2 teams that are respectively 13th and 15th in the Eastern Conference. This Pittsburgh Penguins team is just a roller coaster. You don't know what to expect, not just from game to game, but from period to period. And that inconsistency in not just level of play, but that inconsistency in what seems to be effort, that is a problem. And that is a problem, like I've said several times on this episode, that you can hold against the core 3 and head coach Mike Sullivan. Honestly, the most consistent thing about this team as a whole is probably that they'll blow a lead in the third period. If you can count on anything, most of the time it's that. With 8 games remaining, 5 are against non-playoff teams, similar to what the Detroit Red Wings were last night. They should make the playoffs with that schedule. They have, of the 3 teams, Pittsburgh Penguins, New York Islanders, Florida Panthers, I don't know how many more times I have to say this. They have the easiest schedule remaining. Yes, they play Boston. Yes, they play New Jersey. They play Minnesota. But 5 of the last 8 are against non-playoff teams. You should be making the playoffs, especially when you sit in the position that you're sitting in right now. But if they want to do that, the core needs to step up off the ice, not on the ice. Right? Last night, the reason they got back into that game, a 5-on-3 goal, a 5-on-4 goal, that's the core, and a goal scored by Jason Zucker from Ricard and Evgeni Malkin. On the ice, you can count on them to get their act together to get this team back in it. At least a little bit. They got back into that game last night. They didn't play well, basically, the entire game, specifically at 5-on-5. But they got back into it because of their sheer talent. But that group of 3, Crosby, Malkin, Letang, you need to step up off the ice and ensure that this Penguins team is ready to go from the drop of the puck. Whether that's against the Boston Bruins or against the Detroit Red Wings, the Chicago Blackhawks, and the Columbus Blue Jackets. 3 teams that are on your schedule the remainder of the year. This team wants to make the playoffs. They do. I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that they're going to try their very best every single night. But when you play down to your opponents the way that they have, it's just not good enough. And I'm going to hold that against the top 3 guys on the roster. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Inside the Penguins or anywhere you get your podcast from. All you have to do is search Tip of the Ice-Burgh, which is our flagship show, and you'll find episodes of Penguins to Go right underneath it. But that's going to do it for this one. We'll see you guys next time.